Hello, my name is Patrick Allen, and I am an interviewer for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And the program in Southwest Ohio is done through the Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library under the direction of Brian Powers. And today is March the 31st, 2025, and we have the distinct privilege of interviewing veteran John Edward Doubet at his home on Fishhawk Court in Mason, Ohio. Mr. Doubet, thank you for doing this interview.
Pat?
Do you go by John, Ed, Eddie?
I'm Eddie.
Okay, Eddie.
And formerly I'm John, I guess.
So, but everybody calls you Eddie?
Yes, close friends and relatives, of which you're one, and Mark is Eddie.
What were you known as in the military?
LT, Lieutenant, what? Ed, probably a shortened version, maybe Ed.
All right.
By other officers, yeah.
Well, before we get into your military career, let's talk about your civilian life. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Chester, Pennsylvania, and it's in the southeastern corner of Pennsylvania. It's actually a tri- or quad-state area.
Not too far from Philadelphia.
Yeah, about 6 miles, well, maybe 10 miles south of Philadelphia. Across the Delaware River from Jersey, and Delaware's down the street, and so is Maryland's a little bit to the southwest.
And what was your birth date?
March 27th, 1942.
So you just had a birthday last week.
I did, yes.
So you were,
Be
what,
83.
83?
83, right.
Well, happy birthday belatedly.
Well, thank you very much, Pat.
What were the names of your mother and father?
My father was John Edward Doubet Sr., Big Ed, and I was always Little Ed as a junior, John Edward Doubet Jr. And my mother's name was Mary Hickey. Let's see, how am I going to put this? Mary Hickey Burke. And yeah.
So, and did they call
Mary Margaret, formerly Mary Margaret Hickey Doubet.
But they referred to her as May?
May, yes.
Do you have any recollection of your dad's birth date or your mom's birth date?
My father's, no, I know my mother, I believe, is November, and my father, I think, is June.
Okay. Did they ever tell you how they met?
I knew their birth date, 1916, so I guess we could figure that out. But
Okay.
my mother and father met probably in high school in Chester.
Was that a public school or?
It was a Catholic high school.
What was the name of it?
St. James, or at that time it was St. Robert's, I think.
Okay.
The
Dad graduate from high school?
yes,
Did he have any
both
further
parents.
education?
No, he didn't. It was high school.
Okay. How about your mom? She graduate high school?
She did.
And did she have any further education?
No.
All right. What'd your dad do? What was his occupation?
My father was, during the Second World War, he worked at Westinghouse.
Do you know what he did? Was he a military?
Yeah, he was with, what's the engine? Fan jet. Probably a nautical. It escapes my mind, but turbines. Worked on turbines, probably nautical turbines.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was a jeweler for most of the rest of his life. At one time, president of the Pennsylvania Jewelers Association. The family has quite a history in jewelry.
Did he have his own shop or did he work for someone else?
It was a family business, and my father was president after my grandfather passed away, at least after my grandfather passed
So your
away.
grandfather was in the jewelry business too?
Yes, he opened a store in Washington, D.C.
What was his name?
in the 1900s, I guess. His name was Carl Augustin Doubet.
How about your grandmother? What was
My grandmother died at an early age, and her name was Veronica O'Rourke. And
O'Rourke?
O'Rourke.
Uh-huh. What's the derivation of Doubet? Is it, what nationality is that?
Doubet is French. The family is pretty well documented history going back to 1660s, and about the town is still there. It's Roy, France, and it's about 40 miles from the Swiss border in eastern France.
Okay.
So,
about when did the Bay family come over to the States?
they came over in 1833
Super.
on ship, landed at New York, across the Buffalo Erie. No, it would be the
So,
Albany Erie Canal, I guess, or New York to Buffalo on a canal.
yeah, from the Hudson over to Erie.
From the Hudson over to Erie,
Yeah.
and settled in Meadville, near Meadville, Pennsylvania.
That's up northwest Pennsylvania.
Right, yeah. And the town was called Frenchtown, a little village, really an intersection. Yeah, still
So
there.
you were born in 1942. Did you have any siblings?
Oh, yeah. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. So it was a family of
Go
7.
down through those, oldest to the youngest.
Sure, I'm the oldest.
All right.
Sister Diane, Sister Mary.
Well, let's talk about Diane a moment.
Okay.
Is Diane married?
Diane is, let's see, widowed.
And her last name, or married name was what?
Kratza.
K-R-
Her married name is Kratza, Kratsa.
And what was
K-
her husband's name?
Gus.
Where did they live?
Gus was from Pittsburgh.
And is she still living?
My sister is living.
Diane? Okay, where does she live?
We're all still living, all 7.
Great.
Yeah, it is very fortunate.
Where's Diane live?
Diane lives back home near, she's moved a little bit lately, but I would say Glen Mills is close enough, or Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And your next oldest was a sister Mary?
Mary.
And did she marry?
Mary is still married, living,
Her married name?
and her married name's Hickey.
Hickey or Kickey?
Hickey. Hickey.
And Mary's still living where she lived?
Mary lives in Boothwyn, Pennsylvania.
What's her husband's name?
Michael.
He's still living?
Yes.
All right. Then you had a brother?
Brother Danny.
Well,
He's-
Mary's 79. Dan's how old? You've got down here 78?
That's probably close enough. Yeah.
And is Dan married?
Danny is married, yes,
What's
to
his-
Barbara.
Okay, where do they live?
They live in Aston, Pennsylvania.
ASTON?
ASTON, Aston.
And you have another brother?
Brother Dennis. Dennis is still living in,
Got him down at 75?
that's close enough.
All right. And do you call him Dennis or Denny?
His friends probably call him Denny. He's always Dennis as far in the family, usually Dennis.
Is Dennis married?
Dennis is married Yes,
And his wife's name?
Dawn. And he's a retired Delaware state policeman.
Oh. Well, is Dan still working or is he retired?
Dan has a jewelry store.
Keeping it in the family?
Yeah, this is where it keeps on going. Danny has a jewelry store in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania.
I've been there. Nice little town.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Then you've got another sister.
My sister Elaine
All right.
was born in Chester.
And she's 71.
Yes, probably correct.
And she's married.
No, she is retired and single.
Was she married to?
She was married
What
to
was her husband's name?
Robert Burke.
Burke.
Burke, Senior, I believe. Yeah.
Where does Elaine live?
Elaine now lives in Clearwater area,
Clearwater, Florida.
Florida.
Is she retired?
She's still working. She still works.
She in the jewelry business?
No.
What'd she do?
She works in a retirement home.
Good.
A nice one too, and yeah.
And then your last sibling was a brother?
Yes, Michael.
And Michael's how old?
He'd be about
68?
probably 4 years younger than. Yeah, that's
got you
close.
down here at 68.
68.
Yeah.
We'll have to go with that. I'm not sure.
Well, that's what you've got written down here on the bio.
Okay, that's good.
And what's Michael do? Is he retired or working?
Michael works part-time with a jeweler.
With a jeweler?
Yes.
Good.
In, where would the address be? Probably Wilmington, Delaware, on the border.
And when he worked full-time, was he in the jewelry business?
Yes, he's been in the jewelry business his whole life. Working for different jewelers, and
So that's quite a history in the jewelry business.
it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is Michael married?
Michael is married
That's his wife.
to Valerie.
Valerie?
Valerie, Valerie.
Yeah. Where do they live?
Or is it Y? I think it's IE, Valerie. Wilmington, Delaware.
Well, how about yourself? You married?
I'm married.
Your wife's name?
Julianne.
And when did you and Julianne get married?
Julie and I met in Monterey, California. I was at Fort Ord, and we married in 1968. So I guess I think we're 57 years now.
Well, I don't know if you filled out this bio form or somebody helped you, but I've got your wedding date as October 14th, 1967.
That'll do, that's good.
And what was
We can edit that.
You can understand why I have a problem with dates and ages.
I do too. And what was Julianne's maiden name?
Julie Ann Jones.
Jones? And you met when you were out of Fort Ord.
As a Fort Ord.
How did you meet?
Well, they didn't have on-post housing. And, of course, I was a bachelor. They didn't have bachelor officers' quarters at the time. If they did, they were all full. So I went together with a friend who I went to school with and another friend, two other officers. And we rented a house right on Monterey Bay. You crossed the street, and there was the beach in Monterey Bay.
That was tough.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it was tough. But so we partied most weekends. And Julie came down with a friend of hers who, it turns out, I had met in Japan before I went to Vietnam. I don't know if I should say I met her, but I knew Marge Edwards. And Marge Edwards came down to Monterey with Julie to one of our parties. And that's when we got together. Matter of fact, Julie and Marge were in our house.
Uh-huh.
And as I was coming down the step, Marge said, "I know that guy. I've seen him before." So that's when we found out it was Japan.
Uh-huh.
So,
All right.
a little coincidence in our life.
Well, let's talk about your childhood. You were born in Chester. Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at St. Robert's Elementary and St. James High School, Catholic high school. And then I graduated and went to Scranton University in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
What did you do at Scranton? What was your major?
I started out major in history, and I switched to sociology. So I ended up with a Bachelor of Science in sociology.
When did you graduate?
Graduated in 1964.
Was St. James High School right there in your hometown?
Yes, in Chester, Pennsylvania.
So going to all these Catholic schools, the family was Catholic?
Yes.
What parish did you belong to?
The parish was St. Robert's,
Okay. Back in those days.
which was related to the grammar school I went to, of course.
And being Catholic myself, back in those days, they had Latin Mass.
Yes.
Yeah. So, did you work at all during high school at St. James?
Yeah. Yes, I worked down the family had a jewelry store in Chester, downtown Chester at 8th and Edgemont. And I used to work there emptying china barrels and cleaning and general maintenance. My grandfather was pretty much my boss at the time.
Oh, good. So you got to know your grandfather a little bit then.
I did. No, man.
Good. Was he Native American, or did he come over from France?
No, my uncle was born in Meadville. He would have been, let's see, maybe second generation from France.
You said your uncle. I'm talking about your grandpa.
Oh, my grandfather was born in Meadville.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
working part-time in a jewelry store and going to school, did you participate in any sports, any athletics?
Well, I always liked football, but I didn't mature very fast, and I was small. But, and I did play football in grammar school. We had a good 8th grade team.
Uh-huh.
And then I got an ear infection as a freshman in high school, and it really hurt me because I was too small, and I really missed an opportunity there. But then I went out when I was a junior.
Uh-huh.
Went out for football, and still too small, really, and way behind, 2 years behind as far as team play goes. And I did track. I think I was in track for a while.
What'd you run in track?
100-yard dash, and maybe a relay. And
Quarter-mile relay or half-mile relay?
a
mile relay?
No, it was probably a half mile at most.
So how'd you choose Scranton?
Scranton had a football team at the time. This would have been in the 60s. And they had recruited some good football players from our high school. And so they came down and actually recruited at our high school.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, I guess they were looking for students. Now it's it's probably grown 5 or 6 times since I went there. But at any rate, they came down and recruited. I took the test and ended up at Scranton.
So you went there to be with your buddies?
Well, they weren't buddies. They were upperclassmen who had played football for Scranton.
Uh-huh.
But I did have some friends that went there.
Okay.
I had one roommate at Scranton whom I didn't know in high school, although we went to the same high school. And I had another friend from the same high school that I remember was Jim Kao and Jack Bauer. So there were a few people I knew.
How do you spell Kao's last name?
Kayo.
Okay. And how about while you were there at Scranton, and did you work during school? Weekends?
I did. I worked evenings at a restaurant called Twin Grill in downtown Scranton.
What did you do at the grill?
I was a waiter. And then I worked on weekends. I worked at a restaurant called Old Heidelberg in, Mount Carmel, Swiftwater, Pennsylvania, and near the Pocono Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a resort. A lot of tourists and visitors.
Did you have your own car then?
No, I used to, as far as I can recall, I hitchhiked.
Do you remember the first car you ever bought?
First car was, I think, a yellow Falcon convertible.
How'd you pay for it?
Probably a loan.
How about your parents? Do you remember when you were a little kid what kind of car they had?
Oh, yes. My father took yards and yards of 8mm film, which, as far as I know, we all still have, my brothers and sisters. And my brother Dennis converted it from tape to disc.
Okay.
So they're there to look at, and if I forget anything, the memories are right there on the 8mm film. So the cars were, a lot of the cars were shown on that. He had a DeSoto, I think a 1953 DeSoto, which I drove. And let me see, a station wagon as the family got bigger. I think that was Dodge. And then a Pontiac, and a lot of different, probably I'm missing some too.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a Plymouth, a gray Plymouth. What are we talking, maybe 6 or 7 different cars.
So after your graduation from Scranton, what did you do?
Well, I should mention I was an ROTC at Scranton. And at the time, Scranton, I think, was a grant college, federal grant. And you were required to take 2 years of ROTC. First 2 years, freshman, sophomore. And then you could option to stay in the program or get out. And I decided to stay in. It was good beer money, $25 a month to walk up to the Armory and back.
So when you graduated then, were you a second lieutenant?
Yes, I was. Second lieutenant commission.
So when you graduated, did you enlist, or did Uncle Sam call you?
Well, I went to an officer basic training camp at Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. And really was, I had postponed that from junior year to senior year.
Okay.
So most of the officers who went to Indiantown Gap were not commissioned, but I was already commissioned. At any rate, then I got orders for Fort Benning, and that was my first, first tour. And I went to, that was another officer basic course.
How long were you at Fort Benning?
I was, I would say, let me think here. I would have been 64, 60, maybe 8 months altogether. I went to airborne school. And before I'll just throw this in too. Before I went to Fort Benning, I worked for a while. Before I got orders to Fort Benning, I worked for a while on Chester Ferry, which was a real thrill. I went from Chester, Pennsylvania to Bridgeport, New Jersey. And I had some incidents, some fun on that.
What kind of work
job.
did you do?
I was a deckhand on the ferry.
A deckhand on a ferry?
Deckhand on a ferry, yeah.
How long did you do that?
For about 4 months, 4 or 5 months before I went to
What river were you crossing?
Delaware.
Okay.
Delaware River.
What kind of money did you make doing that?
Can't remember how much. It was mostly for I should have been in the Navy. I was always interested in the Navy and ships and whatnot, so that's about as close as I ever got to being in the maritime.
So you had some instances while you were there at camp?
Well, the incidents resulted from the fact that the owner knew they were going to build a bridge, the John Barry Bridge, which crossed the Delaware, about from the same point the ferry ran from Chester to Bridgeport. So he didn't spend any more money on maintenance. And that was a result of several little incidents I'll never forget. One of which was, they hired a new engineer. Of course, this one ferry that he was on had dual engines, or let's say a propeller on the bow and the stern. And I guess he claimed to know how to operate that. And it was steam engine. It was oil-fired steam, which I loved because I could go down below decks and watch the engine turn. And but at any rate, he obviously didn't really know the process of running the ferry, but he pushed the wrong levers and it crashed into the slip and destroyed one winch, one tie-up, the starboard winch, let's say. And then later on in the afternoon, he did it again, and this time it pinched so bad that the timbers, which were 1x1 timbers, popped into the air like toothpicks, and then crashed back into the river and made a big geyser when it crashed in. So, and I was he had 2 ferries. I was in the other ferry and got a really good look at the accident. And of course, the ferry I was on was diesel operated, not steam. But at any rate, that's just to give you an example.
Well,
every day was a new venture, new example.
The ferry you worked on, was that passenger and automobile, or strictly one or the other?
That's a good question. It was commercial, passenger vehicles, and it's just so happened a lot of sand trucks coming over from New Jersey, which were heavy. And one of my jobs was collecting tickets. And one day, I wasn't paying attention, and I loaded too many sand trucks on the outside. You really should have loaded them on the inside near the center column. And I looked back, and the ferry was at a list of maybe, 5 degrees.
So what'd you do?
So I had to look. I looked back in the line. There was a line of cars, and I had a couple more trucks. So I loaded all the rest of the cars on the starboard side. Most of the trucks, let's say they were all on the port side. So all I had to do was make sure that I stabilized it a little. So it was nip and tuck as far as a flush deck goes when it went into the slip.
So you learned your lesson. That only happened one time?
That only happened once.
Okay, so you went from working on the ferry
To Fort Benning. Yes.
and you went into jump school?
Yes, I went to jump school.
Why'd you go into jump school? More money?
Well, there was more money, and there was a choice. You could go to jump school and ranger school. And I knew enough about ranger school that I decided I'd rather, the way I thought about it was if I ever need to go through that ranger school, I'd just do it. But I'm not going to volunteer for it, which is what happened. Vietnam was ranger school. But, so I figured parachuting would be unique. So I decided to go airborne.
So you're at Benning about 8 months, and then what's your next assignment?
Then my next orders would have been to Korea. Yeah, Korea.
How did you get to Korea? Plane, ship?
Flew to Korea.
Where did you leave from? Washington?
Let's see. Probably from Philadelphia.
Philadelphia?
Philadelphia by way of Washington State.
Okay.
And then on an arc across to Korea. And landed at Kimpo Air Base in Korea. And then I had a headquarters company.
And how do you spell Kimpo?
Kimpo.
Very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Where was that?
It's between where the Incheon. It's between Incheon and Seoul.
Okay.
Matter of fact, it's not too far from Kimpo where I landed, actually.
Okay.
Kimpo's in between Seoul and Incheon.
So were you stationed at Kimpo then?
No, I was in ASCOM District Command, which was 8th Army, which is headquartered in Seoul. And so it was 8th Army Support Command. And I was in a major slot as a second lieutenant with a headquarters company commander.
What were your duties? What did you do as a...
Duties there was, taking care of personal needs, I guess, equipment and supplies for the headquarters. And probably I don't know, I can't remember whether I had a mess hall or not. No, I'm going to forget that. But it was primarily supplying the headquarters company and the staff of the the district command.
What kind of accommodation?
I had 5 or 6 different fire stations too, all over the area. I used to have to fly to them to pay everybody.
So what did you have to fly those stations for, to see how their supplies were?
Well, actually to pay them, usually I'd go to either in Jeep or if they were too far away, and one of them was, one of the fire stations was up on an island, Wamido, I believe, was the island right at the mouth of the Han River. And I would have to fly up there on helicopter to pay those troops.
Uh-huh.
And then another problem with having so many firehouses and people all over a certain area was you couldn't account for blankets, pillowcases, and whatnot. So one thing I did there was to put in a report a survey. I requested a report a survey mainly because I knew the books would never get straightened out until they did a report a survey. So what I risked there was a funny thing would be a promotion in rank,
To what?
so that they could dock your pay to make up for the lost equipment, which is considerable. Because the survey hadn't been done for years, and Koreans were were somewhat notorious for theft.
Five-finger discount?
Five-finger discount. I shouldn't blame the Koreans. It might have been the troops that sold the blankets and the pillowcases and the beds and bedding and whatnot. But that was, the colonel knew what I was doing, because basically, I think, because I told him. I said, the only way you're going to straighten the books out after years is to do the report of survey and write it off or whatever you do.
How long did it take you to do that survey? We're talking weeks or months?
Probably a month, maybe. I really can't recollect.
So what was your next duty from Seoul?
From Korea was I volunteered for Vietnam.
Why did you volunteer for Vietnam?
I loved history. I've read history all my life. And I had been trained as an infantry officer, and here I was in a support command. So I really just decided being trained as an infantry officer, I'd go where the action was. And that was Vietnam. So history be a part of history was one reason, which is kind of probably unusual, but.
Well, let me ask you, while you were in Korea, did you ever have any leave to come home or go anywhere other than in Korea?
No, I was 8 months in Korea, and then I volunteered from Korea to Vietnam I took a month's leave in Japan. And then we can back up. That's where I met Marge Edwards. She was the nurse at the hospital in Kashini Barracks, it was, I believe. You recall I mentioned that when I was coming down the stairs at our place in Monterey, I know that guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's when she knew me, was Japan.
So where were you how long did you spend in Japan? A month?
Yes, a month. I took a month's leave, and it was a hospital, actually, at the time. My orders were for Camp Zama, but Camp Zama was deserted. That was MacArthur's headquarters in the Second World War, and it was basically empty. And I didn't want to spend my whole leave there, so somehow I heard about Kashini, and I went down there, and a sergeant major put me up in one of the buildings they weren't using at the time, and I ended up on the first floor of the Kashini Barracks house, building number 2 or whatever.
So this is about 20 years after the Second World War. Did you have any interaction with any of the Japanese citizens?
I did.
How did they treat you?
Well, I remember basically just one incident where I was in Tokyo on a visit up to Tokyo. We were, I don't know, maybe an hour from Tokyo by train, maybe. Don't even remember how I got there, but I was in a restaurant, and across from me was a Japanese soldier. He was a Second World War veteran. And we talked. And I don't have any memory of the conversation, but it was mutually fine. There wasn't any bitterness. We spoke as soldiers. Mm-hmm. And I don't know anything about him.
Do you remember whether he was actually in combat during the war?
I don't know. I really can't say.
I don't remember. Okay. All right. So, how about when you were in Benning? Did you get any time to come home?
At Benning, Yeah, I believe I did. I probably took another leave before going to Korea from Benning. Yeah.
So you go from Korea over to Vietnam. Where did you land in Vietnam? Let me get a map here.
Okay.
Give Mark time to, I'll put it in front of me and let Mark focus in on it. Tell me when you're okay, Mark.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, show where you came.
All right.
Use that pen to...
Yep. Well, I landed at Tan Son Nhut. Well, first of all, I went from Japan, stop over at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and down from there down to Tan Son Nhut, outside of Saigon. And then I got a flight on a C-130 up to An Khê. And An Khê was the headquarters of the 1st Cavalry Division. And
that's what you were in?
I was in the 1st Cavalry Division, and I was assigned to A Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Cav of the 1st Cavalry Division. And we operated in an area, and it's actually 2nd Corps. They had divided Vietnam into 3 corps, 1, 2, 3, 1 north, 2 central, 3 south. And we operated in an area in the middle, which is easily designated 2nd Corps. So we would have been areas people might be familiar with. Ya Drang would be about here, and that was the first big battle in the war. Was at Ya Drang. I'm sorry, I was over in Cambodia, but it would be in here. Ya Drang, Pleiku was an important base, and we operated a lot in Bang Son over on the coast, so it was 2nd Corps area of Vietnam.
So were you in active combat in that area?
Well, luckily, we patrolled for 3 months on different operations, but my unit never got into contact. These were mostly ambush patrols, search and destroy, which they called, was the name for it. And I got in a skirmish over here in a real jungle area of Vinh Thanh Valley. And that's where I was wounded and evacuated. And went to Quy Nhon over on the coast. You can't quite see it, when wounded, I went back to An Khê. And then from An Khê to Quy Nhon, I was there for about a week. And then back home by way of Clark again. Stopped in California and ended up at Valley Forge Hospital. So that's my...
What's the most significant thing that you recall from being over in Vietnam, and where were you on the map when that happened?
Well, the most significant thing, I suppose, was being wounded in Vinh Thanh Valley on Operation Crazy Horse. And
what were you doing at the time you were wounded?
I was a platoon leader.
What were you doing? On a mission, scouting?
To tell you the truth, I don't know what the mission was at the time. We had a change of command at that time. And I don't know if the map's going to do much good.
How'd you get wounded?
Well, we got in an area, the worst area that I had been in 4 months. And I knew it was bad because we went up the middle of a chasm, what I would call a chasm. Mm-hmm. somewhat like going up a miniature Grand Canyon. I look out to the left. I think we were on a Chinook, or doesn't matter what plane. I look out to the left, and it was sheer jungle to the left and sheer jungle to the right, going up to, I think, maybe 800 feet. 800
In a helicopter.
In a helicopter flying up the middle of the chasm, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I hope they get us on some high ground, because we're, at any rate, we never did get up, and they let us out on a, I would say it was I called it a snake pit. It was the junction of 2 or 3 little brooks or streams. So it was kind of soggy or swampy landing zone. And I was told, I don't even know if I was told or had orders at the time, but we were put out there, and the only order I knew of was that I had a segment or sector, let's say from A to B sector, my platoon that is. The company might have had a whole perimeter, but you couldn't even tell that, because what was happening was there were 3 or 4 ridges coming down into this sinkhole. And for me to post my platoon, there was only enough room for maybe a squad or 8 people. The rest, the only other thing I could do was put people up on the side of the hill, if you can imagine Iwo Jima maybe, but they had no field of fire from up, if you posted them up there. And it just so happens when we landed, I went over and there were some troops from another battalion, either another battalion, yeah, I think they were, or if it was our battalion, it was another company. Anyway, I remember, I think it was 1st to the 12th or whatever, that doesn't matter so much. I asked them how long they'd been there, and they looked terrible. These, maybe eight guys in the squad. And they said they'd been there for a week, and I said, did you have any casualties? And they said, yeah, there were 2 or 3 of us were wounded or killed. And I said, so I looked around the territory, I said, people were coming off of this ridge in front of them, and obviously picking them off, wounded and killed out of their foxholes. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to have people sitting down here getting shot at. We got to get up on that ridge and post somebody. So we went up on the ridge that night, and we came under fire, and that's when I had one fella killed. David Canales was killed, and because the fire was very unusual coming in from opposite ridges, I think, from the one we were on. And because they were so close, these ridges were so close together, you were always in fire. At any rate, most of the rifle fire was coming in right at your head. We were prone, everybody was prone, but the machine gun fire was hitting right at ground level. So we probably would have been better off standing rather than in a prone position. But anyway, David got killed when he got hit in the throat. So, and I remember people yelling, David's dying, David's Canales is dying, but there wasn't anything much you could do about that at the time. So I had to make a decision whether to stay on the ridge that night or go back down and come back the next morning. And I didn't like the fact we were getting crossfires from the other ridges, so I decided we'll get down. We'll get off the ridge and come back tomorrow morning, which we did. Came back up the next morning, and I went with one squad. I went with one squad because we didn't have room to maneuver much at all with because of the terrain.
Yeah.
So we went up the ridge a little ways and ran into, I was with one squad. And the squad leader, he discovered a picket, Viet Cong picket, or maybe North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, I'm not sure. I don't know which it was, but he opened fire, and my people, the squad, opened fire. There was very little visibility, maybe 5, maybe 4 yards from that anybody would have had. But I was looking for a tree for cover, and the only tree that was near me, one of the troopers was behind. So I was squatting at the time, and that's when I got hit. And I wondered.
Were you hit by a machine gun or rifle? Or?
Probably more than likely a AK-47 or rifle.
Where were you hit?
Left forearm, and it shattered the ulna in one spot. You have 2 bones in your forearm. It shattered the one, the ulna. I believe the other one's the radius, which was still intact. But so I was taken back down. Got a shot of morphine.
So did you have a medic with you in that squad?
Yeah, we did. We had a medic, and they always carried morphine syrettes, and they worked well. You just jam it in the thigh, and it would pretty much act instantly.
You remember the medic's name?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I had the other thing I guess I should mention is I had only been with that platoon for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks at the most. So I wasn't that familiar with it. I can't remember who my platoon sergeant was. But so as far as command goes, I was a little confused at the time. But at any rate,
so how did you get out of that chasm where you were when you were shot?
Well, that's all I knew for 30 years. I was evacuated.
How'd you get out of there? Did you walk out of there?
Just walk back down the hill, down off the ridge. And I was evacuated on Chinook helicopter back to Anke. 30 years later, I asked the guys I was with in the squad what happened. And I always wondered, I could never understand why this Viet Cong would stick around and fire back. Of course, the assumption I made that he was facing us when he fired, but I found out later, this is a reunion 30 years later, that what he did was tuck his AK-47 probably, or whatever rifle he had, under his arm, and he laid down his own covering fire. In other words, he was running back to his people and spraying behind him with his gun under his arm. And that made a lot of sense to me. But this is 30 years after the fact.
Yeah.
So and I asked the guys, was anybody else wounded or killed? And they said, no. And I kind of remember somebody saying there were dead bodies they found later on. And I should mention, we did call in aerial support the night that David was killed. That would be the night before I was wounded. And that was an A1E Sky Raider that came across, and I told them to keep it out pretty far, maybe 500 meters, so that possibly could have killed some people. I don't know.
Now, when you say killed some people, you're talking about our people?
I'm talking about Viet Cong or North Vietnamese.
Could you tell the difference between the VC and the
usually you could. The North Vietnamese were better equipped. They were regular units like us. A lot of them would have been French war veterans, some of them. So
Did you ever capture any of them? Any enemy?
No.
Did you ever talk to any enemy who had been captured?
No.
When you get
I should mention this also. There was another pretty big battle that happened the same night that we were on the ridge. B Company landed probably in the same landing zone we did, and they maneuvered further up this gorge, and they got in a big fight. I mean, they had a lot of killed and wounded, more or less ran into an ambush. And a good friend of mine told me about that fight. So I have a feeling that there was a enemy headquarters if you went up to the top of the ridge of those ridges.
Mm-hmm.
If there was any flat ground around or any, I think there was a headquarters back in that area. And it was defended, all the ridges leading to it were defended.
Well,
Yeah.
when you're out on patrol, did you go out on patrols at night?
No. No, we usually, that's one thing when over the years when I came back or got out of the Army, I noticed that I was always interested in tactics and and they did a lot of night patrolling, and I don't recall that we ever did. We would set up a night ambush site, but we didn't move at night. And I don't think that they should have ever done it, actually.
Were you able to ambush any enemy at one of your sites?
Never did. No.
Okay. Out on patrol during the day, how did you protect yourself from traps or mines or bungees?
We were fortunate. That's another thing. We were fortunate. We're operating in the Central Highlands, so it's not a heavy populated area. And the only traps that I remember running into were punchy, let's say I would call maybe punchy stick gardens. And they were planted with bamboo, what they call punji sticks at angles. And bamboo has a high tensile strength, and you could make a very sharp knife point with it, so they could penetrate right through boot and flesh. But I happened to get a Purple Heart for stumbling into one, and I was fortunate because it hit the shin bone, it didn't penetrate, and I just limped around for a day or two. I don't know why, just limping.
Uh-huh.
So.
Was that from one of the punji sticks?
Yes.
Was that buried in a hole, or was that?
No, what they do, Pat, is they pick out what would be a likely landing zone, and sometimes you would have elephant grass, which would cover the stakes, but they would simply plant like a 1.5 foot long stake, carved split bamboo with a point, and stick it in the ground at angles. And there would be hundreds, maybe even thousands of them. And as a matter of fact, when I ran into one, we knew there were punji stakes on this LZ where we landed. And one of the problems was you couldn't always see them because the bamboo, the grass could be as tall as your waist. But at any rate, we knew the stakes were there. As a matter of fact, I remember a guy holding a bunch of them with his arm folded. So we were very careful when we got out. You'd have to take a step at a time and be very careful. And I never did I took one step when we got over to the tree line, and damn if I didn't run into a punji stake.
Mm-hmm.
So, at any rate. But getting back to booby traps, That's all I remember getting into, and it was mainly because we were in a depopulated area. We'd run into mountain yard camps, mountain yards being the native people that lived in that jungle, and allies of ours for the most part.
Yeah.
So,
Did you have any interrelationship with any of the mountain yards?
no, other than the fact that we ran into, let's say, one of their squads or platoons, and they had a major, an American major was in charge, and the mountain yards were small people, as I recall. And they had GI helmets that went down almost to their shoulders. and they had M1s, maybe. At any rate, the rifle, when they were, let's say, standing with the rifle, would be almost over their head. And they didn't understand English very well. And this major would be cursing at them in English, and you don't do this, and that's all I remember about and it was hilarious watching that outfit. I don't know why or how we came across them, but at any rate.
Well, let's go to your helicopter back to base there at On K. Did they have a hospital or operating station there?
They did. That was probably, I was taken there, and they did probably a debridement, take out bone chips and clean the wound. And there was a funny incident there. I don't know why I remember this, but I do. I mean, being under morphine, I don't know why I remembered it, but the physician or the surgeon there asked me, where'd you get hit? And I said, coordinates 567-432. And I remember him cursing, and he said, these damn infantrymen, they're all the same. No, I mean, like your arm, your leg, I said, my arm. So that's all I remember of On K.
So
And then,
what did you have? Do you have a cast on or just a bandage or what?
from On K, I went to Quignon, and I don't remember, but I was put into a cast, I think, pretty quickly. Actually, this wound, I couldn't even see it. It wasn't until I got to Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, and I was in a cast with a little hole in it where the wound was, and I had to hold it up to the mirror just to see the wound because of where it was. And there it is. I showed it to you. Right there. It hit the ulna.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other thing I never figured out was why I didn't get hit.
Can you see that, Mark?
Yeah, yeah.
You got it?
So I was holding a rifle like this, and I knew where I was hit, and I couldn't understand where it went from hitting the bone. And to this day, the only thing I can figure out is it went under my arm, over this shoulder, but I was looking for a second entry.
Yeah.
But so I guess that's what happened.
Could it have hit the rifle and ricocheted off?
It could have hit it could have hit anything before it hit me too. But
How long were you at Quignon?
about, I would say a week. Wasn't much more than a week, I don't think.
And where did you go?
Enough time for them to evaluate whether to, I think, stay in country or go home. And they sent me home by way of, we landed at Clark, and here's another coincidence. I was on a C-141 with other wounded, and an officer came on, a doctor came on, an Army doctor, and he was doing rounds on the plane. And it just so happens he comes up to me and he says, I knew him from Japan. And when I was in Japan on leave, I palled around with a surgeon, an anesthesiologist, and maybe another doctor. And he was one of them. he was one of them. And so we met again, me on the C-141, and he had been reassigned, I guess, to Clark.
Uh-huh.
So from there to Valley Forge Hospital. The good thing about that, it doesn't matter really, so I think I'll skip that fact.
Okay.
But for Valley Forge, actually I landed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and then we were bused to Valley Forge. As I understand it, they tried to get you as close to home as possible, put you in a hospital. I think it's been deactivated. Valley Forge Hospital has been.
So what was your rank when you were deactivated?
Captain.
When were you promoted to captain?
As I recall, I believe I got my captain bars at the Valley Forge Hospital while I was in the hospital. And first lieutenant was, I can't remember. First lieutenant would have been between Vietnam and Valley Forge Hospital. So I actually probably promoted to first lieutenant, well, not even on what you'd call active duty, hospital patient. So people wonder how. People ask, how did you make captain so fast in 4 years? And the only answer I have for that is attrition. Mm-hmm. It was a company level war. By that I mean second, first lieutenants, captains, and that's about I think most of your casualties were what they call company grade officers and enlisted.
Were they the main targets for the enemy, trying to get the officers and the medics?
Actually, they would go for the radio telephone operator probably first, knock out communications between company and battalion.
Did you have any radio operators in any of the units you were with?
Yes, as a platoon leader, you have an RTO radio telephone operator, and he carried what they call PRC 25 radio carried on the back.
How heavy was that?
And that was my communication with company and battalion if I had to. And his name, he was a funny kid. I remember I'd like to find him again. His name was Orndorff.
Orndorff?
Orndorff, Orndorff. And he was from Virginia Beach, Virginia, I believe.
How heavy was that radio he was hauling around?
I would guess that it had another 25 pounds, maybe 30 pounds. I don't really know. But he was funny. He always carried it. He smoked the pipe. And the thing I remember about Orndorff is he would be at the edge of the helicopter as we were flying. And we didn't use seat belts because if it was what they call a hot LZ, you'd want to get out as quick as you could because you were the target. But so Orndorff would be hanging at the edge of the helicopter, and especially when the helicopter would bank, he'd be sitting there with his pipe, and he'd be at an angle like where you'd swear he was going to fall out. I used to keep my left arm stiff so that I could grab him. But the kid was unfazed. It's just one of those things that you never forget.
It's like when you're driving in a car with your kids, you put your arm out to protect them from...
That's exactly it, Pat. It was, I guess, sometimes I think it must have been centrifugal force kept him in there. I don't know. But the other story about him, I got to tell this. He would, one night we're on this top of this ridge, and that's where we slept that night. And we got up the next, well, that night, all night long, I hear this noise. Went on for a half hour, an hour. Finally, I guess I went to sleep, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Next morning, I wake up. Of course, it's already 90 degrees as the sun comes up. And I look over toward Orndorff. There's a case of sea rations. I think that's about 8 meals in a case, with all the empty meal boxes piled up high.
And that was the clicking noise.
And that was the noise. It was Orndorff opening all the cans with a P38 opener, which is just like a blade with you hold the blade and just open the can, but it's a click noise. And so I'll never figure out what he was doing or thinking, unless he was just nervous, whether it was case of nerves or what. But my platoon sergeant, Alex Maka, happened to be, he was death on wheels when it came to rations. If you dropped a meal, in other words, he accounted for meals more than anything. He probably even ammunition. So, because it's his job to keep everybody fed more or less. At any rate, the first thing I thought when I saw that, with a pile of cans, I said, Maka is just going to run all over this guy. He's gonna, which happened. So by this time, after Sergeant Mega chewed him out, I look at Orndorff. He's green. He's turning green. He's already puked over the side of the mountain. So we formed up. We got to go on patrol. And he being my RTO, I looked back at him and I said, Orndorff, of course, Sergeant Meg had already told him, you're not going to be evacuated. I don't care if if you puke your guts out, you're not going. So I looked back at Orndorff. He looked so sick. I said, you can go back. We'll take you back if you want. And he said, no, I'm going to go or something like that, because he didn't want, I know it was because he didn't want Sergeant Baker to think that he couldn't hump it after he ate the whole case of sea rations. But, so if you're out there, Orndorff, can't remember his first name, but get in touch with me. But
oh, shoot.
Along with that, I try and remember. I was only there, 1/4 of a tour, and but what I try and remember are the funny parts, and there were laughs. That's the only thing that kept you going, at least for me, anyway.
Well,
couldn't get too serious.
When you first got to Vietnam and you get off the airplane, you get off the plane, what strikes you? Is it the heat, the smell, or what was it?
That's a good question, Pat. First of all, coming from Korea, it was a whole different geography, of course, climate and whatnot. I was struck by the fact it was a beautiful country. Most veterans will tell you that. Absolutely a fairyland. And it's hard to imagine a war going on there. People seem to be friendly enough. Although you did, from what you heard, you would be waiting for somebody to throw a grenade at you or do, but that didn't happen. So I remember the beauty of the place. It was hot. It was so hot that when I first got there, I went to a Central point before they give you orders. And there was a bunk, a spring bunk, a spring bed. And it was so hot, I said, I folded up the mattress and slept on the spring so I could get air in there. Mm-hmm. Then I remember taking a lot of time going to get some pay. I guess I was exchanging money or something, but I didn't really even walk. It was so hot you slowed your pace a little. So, but it was hot, and then I flew up to the Central Highlands. You're talking about maybe 5 degrees cooler usually, but in general it was higher and cooler. A 3 canopy jungle, so it's more comfortable. So I have a lot of empathy for guys who were down in the Delta and down around Saigon, Benoit. I mean, they suffered more from heat than we did.
Well, you pointed on the map that you were at various locations there in Zone 2. What kind of sleeping accommodations did you have? Were you in tents or barracks or what?
Sleeping, for the most part, we did in the field, in the jungle. And when you're on patrol for 8 hours, the only thing I can think of is I don't remember much about sleeping, actually. But I think you were tired enough that it didn't matter. You just slept. I did have a favorite sleeping area. I would try and find, if we were in a forest area, I'd find I like to find a eucalyptus tree. I think they were eucalyptus. At any rate, whichever tree it was, it had roots that projected from the ground and made it like a crotch. So you had a wall on your left and a wall on your right, and I'd back into that crevice between the tree roots, and it made for a very comfortable place.
Some of the guys from the Vietnam that I've interviewed have talked about snakes. Did you have any encounters with snakes over there?
I came across a couple dead ones, and they were green with a yellow bottom. They called them, I think that was the bamboo viper. Yeah, I don't think it's a scientific name for them, but that's what they were called.
Were you warned anything about those snakes?
Nah, all we knew is they were poisonous. What I found personally was most wild things in the jungle, and from years of fishing, is all creatures are going to try and get out of your way. So I don't have a lot of fear of animals, and the snakes were not. I don't really have that much fear of snakes, for that matter. I know what they can do, but the other time, to get as far as snakes go, I had a fella. He was a black soldier in my platoon, and he had a very high voice, I remember. And it went something like this, At any rate, I was standing in the middle of the jungle one time, and this black trooper says, Sir, there's a snake by your heel. There's a snake by your heel. So I looked around, and sure enough, like off to maybe 3 feet off to the side, there was a snake. It was one of the bamboo vipers. And I don't remember what happened after that, but it was no threat. I didn't see a threat. And I think I told the trooper, I said, it's okay, he's not, it wasn't that big, and it was just laying there. I don't know if he was sleeping or what, but I didn't feel threatened. What I remember is this voice, Sir, there's a snake. But there were other things. There was ants, there was ants that made a nest out of tree leaves, and they'd end up in a big ball. and there'd be thousands of ants in these nests. They would hang off a tree branch.
Oh, hanging off the trees?
Off the tree branch, the nest.
Wow.
And there'd be thousands of them in there. So the guys had a little trick they liked to play. They would be walking in single file, and they would come up to a nest. They make a quick movement around the nest, trying to make it so that the guy behind him, if he wasn't paying attention, wouldn't see that movement. He'd bang into the nest.
Oh, jeez.
And they'd end up naked in the middle of the trail, trying to get a snake, get all these ants off. And I couldn't help thinking, you know, if we're going to get killed, this is where it's going to be. Somebody's going to see all this noise and everything. But there wasn't any point I could see. And you couldn't stop the guy. He's, you know, you got to get him off of you because they would bite, and then you got 1,000 of you over in no time. But the other thing was, you'll hear people talk about leeches. And there was a leech that was a ground leech. It was terrestrial, not found in water like most leeches. And I remember the first time I saw one, it was like a little slinky, and it would hop up your arm, slinky style. Didn't know at the time that was a leech. But what would happen is if it got under your sleeve or down your collar and it was impeded in its motion, it would just plant itself in your skin and start pumping itself up with blood, like any leech. So.
Did you have some of those?
Oh yeah, we run in. Usually, you get into an area that was infested. By that I mean they were everywhere. It usually was a damp place. It might be after a rain, and they lived in trees. They would fall off of trees, and you could actually see them crawling towards you. I kind of remember that too, but no real threat. It used to be, for a while, they would stop and pick the leeches off, but then we got to, if you got into a place where a lot of them, you'd have to, we made a SOP that we'd stop every half hour and get rid of the leeches. Mm-hmm. We couldn't be stopping a patrol every time somebody got a leech on it. So I remember one time we stopped, and as platoon leader, I had to go up to the front, and I asked, why are we stopped? And I remember I had a black sergeant, a big guy named, I don't know how he got the name Boffman, but I'm pretty sure it was Sergeant Boffman. And at any rate, he was sitting down, and I said, why are we, he had the lead squad, and I said, why are we stopped? He said, I got a leech on me. And I said, you know the SOP. You know, we're not stopping for, I looked down, he had a leech on his testicle. Sergeant Boffman, we'll make an exception here. So, yeah, when, you know, it was, actually, I didn't mind being in the jungle, and yeah, I was very fortunate to be in the jungle, and that goes back to what I'm saying about somebody working, having to operate in the Delta, you know.
Well, you mentioned helicopters. How many times were you inserted by way of helicopter?
Probably 10 to 15 times.
Did you have any outstanding incidences other than when you got that punching stick?
No, but I was witness to a crash off the side of a cliff once.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, the pilots were unbelievable for the most part. Just, you couldn't find better pilots, aircraft pilots. But in this case, we were coming into a ridge, and there were landing troops on an angle on the ridge, more or less like this, and one behind the other. And I was in a helicopter in the air, maybe a half a mile off or even closer, a quarter mile off, waiting for our turn to go down or get landed. And this chopper lost his forward motion and started drifting off the side of the ridge and lost control, turned over. And of course, if you get hit with one of those blades, they could cut you in half, take a leg off, whatever. And I'm sure somebody got wounded badly on that. But I remember seeing it was much like the ferry thing, watching the whole thing happen in front of you. But
So did it crash land? Did it explode into flames, or just stayed intact when it fell to the ground?
The only thing I remember, I don't know whether we made a maneuver or what in the craft I was in, but the only witness I was to sliding off the hill and losing control and turning over.
Okay.
And of course, maybe some props beating around in the bushes. And I don't know whether our man turned off, or I can't remember whether we decided we'd find another place to land or what. Maybe. I don't know.
I've heard a lot about Hueys. What helicopters did you fly in?
Mostly Hueys, and once or twice Chinook.
How many soldiers would the Hueys carry?
The Huey would take, I think maybe 8.
Take a whole squad?
Yeah, that'd be a squad. Actually, I think a squad was 12, but to some degree it depended on what model chopper you were in, because they had different seating arrangements.
How about the Chinooks?
Chinook would take, as I recall, would take my platoon, 44 people maybe if we were full strength, which we rarely ever were.
Well, but I've got here in your DD 214 that when were you discharged?
Fort Carson, Colorado.
And when was that?
1968.
So you were in the service from 65 to 68. You were in Vietnam for about a quarter of a term. And,
4 months.
And so, what did you do when you got out at Fort Carson?
Well, I went home. Let's see. Well, Julie and I got married while I was at Fort Ord. I should say we got married at Fort Ord, when we were at Fort Ord. And I had maybe another year or two at Fort Ord. And I was a headquarters company commander there with a headquarters company training brigade. Somehow they always like to put me in a headquarters company, but
Where did you live? On base or off base?
Julie and I got an apartment off base in Pacific Grove, California, which was nice. And then I got orders to Fort Carson. And we both remember we weren't told what we were going to be doing at Fort Carson. I couldn't, so since I couldn't get an answer to that question, I knew what the answer was. I was going to a unit that was going back to Vietnam, so. And I found out when I got there that everybody but me knew what was going on. But at any rate, that happens sometimes.
So did you go back to Vietnam?
No, I decided by then, I obviously had a new wife, and Julie was pregnant with our first daughter, so I had a wife and daughter, And I had enough time to get out, get released from active duty, which is what I decided to do. I didn't think we were going anywhere in Vietnam. I knew that from a very early time. Could never quite figure out what we were doing there.
So what was your rank when you decided you were going to get out of the military?
Captain.
Still captain?
Mm-hmm.
So did Julie have your first child there at Fort Carson, or?
Yeah, Julie. We had Rachel.
All right. Well, let's ask about your children. How many children did you and Julie have?
Julie and I have 3 children.
Rachel.
And John and Matt.
Is Rachel married?
Yes.
What's her married name?
Rachel Casanta.
Casanta.
Right. Yep.
And I've got her down here at age 57.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Rachel live?
Rachel lives about 15 minutes away in, what would it be? Kings. I guess Kings.
She have children?
Kings was Kings area.
She have children?
Be a Mainville address, maybe. She has 2 girls.
What are their names?
Gianna and Lainey, or Elena. We call her Lainey. And we call Gianna Gia.
What's Rachel's husband's name?
Raymond.
What's Ray do?
Ray is a mechanical engineer? He's an engineer.
Do you know who he works for?
Yeah, General Electric.
How about Rachel? Is she a stay-at-home mom, or she work?
Rachel is a drug salesperson. She works.
So she's selling legitimate drugs, is she not?
Yeah. I wasn't going to say drug dealer, but
Okay, and then you got a son, John. John.
yes, John is married to Patty, and John is a graphic artist.
What's his wife's name?
Patty.
Patty. Where is he a graphic artist?
It's a good question. I can't. It's a tri-name. I can't recall at the moment.
Yeah, I've got him down at age 55.
Yeah.
Now, he's John Doubet the third.
Yes, John Edward Doubet III.
I'm surprised he's not in the jewelry store business.
Well, he's 500 miles from where most of that action is. Otherwise, he might be.
Did John and Patty have kids?
Yes. They have Cara.
Cara?
Cara, C-A-R-A.
Mm-hmm.
I should say Molly, because he's the oldest. Molly is the oldest. Molly, and then Cara. 2 girls.
All right. So then we've got Matt, you said?
Yeah, Matthew is married to Elizabeth.
What's Matt do?
Matt works for Salesforce, and I would not really know a whole lot about what he does.
Okay.
He's a software salesman of the first rank, I guess.
He and Elizabeth have children?
Yes.
What do they have?
They have Zachary, Charlie, and Annie.
Zach, Charlie, and who?
Zachary, Charlie, and Annie.
Annie?
Annalise, yeah, Annie. Call her Annie.
So he's got your only grandsons. Girls have 2 girls.
Mm-hmm.
How about Patty? Does she work outside the home, or is she a homemaker?
Patty is working. I don't know whether it's part-time or full-time. I think it's a wedding dress.
Wedding venue?
Pardon me?
A wedding venue?
Yes.
Okay. And how about Elizabeth? Does she stay-at-home mom, or does she work outside?
She's stay-at-home right now. She loves pickleball.
How about Rachel? Does she go to college?
Rachel did. She's a Dayton alumni.
University of Dayton?
Yeah, University
And how
of Dayton.
about John?
John might have had 2 years of college.
Where?
Cincinnati.
How about Matt?
And he went to a graphic art school for 2 years, I think.
How about Matt?
Matt is an alumni of Ohio University in Athens.
Down in Athens. That's not too far from my hometown.
Where you told me that? Where's that?
Near Lexington and Prairie.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Well, let's talk about your work history. You come back, you're married, you have a child. First of all, where did you live when you first came back?
When I first came back was Fort Ord, Monterey, California. Got married, lived in Pacific Grove, which is Monterey, for all intents and purposes.
You went to Fort Carson.
Yep. Then at Fort Carson, then released from duty, then went back to Chester.
Chester, okay.
Actually, Newtown Square, which is basically not far from Chester.
All right. So what, did you buy a house or rent an apartment?
We rented an apartment. And I worked in this family jewelry store, retail.
So then, did you have your other two children while you lived there?
Let's see. Well, Rachel was born at Fort Carson. Matt was born in Chester, same town as me, while we were living there.
All right.
After I got out of the service. Matt was born in Chester.
Okay. At some point in time, you worked for Scott Paper?
Scott Paper was my first civil employment, yeah.
Was that after you worked in the jewelry business?
Well,
Or did you work in both?
it was after I did a short spell in jewelry.
Where did you work for Scott?
Scott Paper sent me out to Ohio. That's when I got familiar with New Lexington, Somerset, all those areas.
Oh, where was your main office?
Well, at that time we were living in Columbus.
Columbus? Whereabouts in Columbus did you live?
I lived east side.
Whereabouts?
I can't remember the name.
Bexley?
Pardon me?
Did you live in Bexley?
Just east of Bexley.
I lived
Yeah.
in Columbus and lived in Bexley.
Oh, did you?
I interviewed a merchant mariner, lived on the same street I did.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, we were right across the street. Was it James Road, I think?
James Road, okay. That's
And,
out by Eastmore?
Eastmore, yeah.
Okay. And your house or apartment?
Apartment.
How long did you live in Columbus?
Jeez, these questions are getting hard. I'm trying to think. Maybe 4 years.
Did you work for Scott all that time?
Yes.
Did they send you somewhere else?
No.
Where'd you go then?
And I went with 3M, Minnesota Mining, Magnetic Products.
And where did you work for 3M?
Southeast Ohio. We lived in Lexington, Kentucky, too, at one time.
Where was your main office for 3M?
At home. I was a salesman.
Working out of the house?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where'd you live then? Athens,
Trying to
Lancaster,
think.
Marietta?
No, it's either Lexington or Columbus. Try to give me a minute. That was in Columbus.
Columbus?
Yeah.
All right.
3M, yeah.
Yeah, apartment or home?
The apartment, Mayfair Apartments is where it was. Now that just popped into my head. Mayfair
What part of
Apartments.
Columbus was that?
Eastmore.
Eastmore?
One we were talking about, same area, east of Bexley.
Okay.
So I was with Scott Paper and 3M while we lived
All
there.
right.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you with 3M?
Ooh, probably maybe going on 2 years.
What'd you do next?
Next, we went back home to Pennsylvania, and I worked in the family store, retail. And then Matt came along, and we needed more money. I couldn't really ask the family to give me what I had been making. So I got a job as a wholesale jewelry salesman. And they sent me back to Ohio.
Where'd you go back to Ohio?
That way, we went to Lexington. That's when we lived in Lexington.
Lexington, up mid-Ohio?
Kentucky, Lexington,
Oh,
Kentucky.
Lexington,
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you retire from that company?
Well, we moved up from Lexington up to Cincinnati. I had accounts with Sheltos and Reichs, and then I think I worked some jewelry retail in Cincinnati area.
For the
Osterman, if you ever heard of them.
Osterman?
Osterman.
Uh-huh.
And then I dabbled in insurance for maybe 4 years.
What kind of insurance? Life, health, auto?
Life and health.
For what company?
And I got into annuities and whatnot.
What company?
As an independent salesman, working with what do you call it? Agency. Working with an agency down in the east side.
Remember the name of it?
Yeah, it's Kroll.
Kroll?
Mm-hmm.
K-R-O-L-L?
Croll. And I learned about stocks, bonds, and cash, basically.
Was that your last civilian employment?
I think it was. If it wasn't, it was retail jewelry. But then I worked for Sears Hardware, retired, and more or less retired, collected Social Security, and went to work mixing paint for Sears.
Just part-time?
Full-time.
Full-time?
Mm-hmm.
And so, when did you retire from Sears?
I was 62, I guess. Or maybe, no, wait a minute. I collected Social Security at 62. And then to make up the difference for not waiting to take Social Security, I decided I would work at a job without having to deal with people mostly. So I worked for Sears. Actually, now that I think of it, it's the longest term of employment I had in my life. 10 years with Sears mixing paint. So.
All right, well, let me recap that. As a civilian, you worked at Scott Paper, 3M.
Mm-hmm.
You worked in
retail and wholesale jewelry
in Lexington, then Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And you worked for Kroll Life Insurance Agency. Then you worked for Sears before you decided.
Actually, I wouldn't say I worked for Kroll. I was an independent agent with Kroll.
Okay. So you could sell for multiple companies.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Sears, 10 years, and you got tired of working and you quit.
Yes, basically.
What do you do in retirement for entertainment?
Retirement. Well, they say now I'm housebound, which is fairly accurate. I can still, I guess I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I have had problems with it. I guess they relate to Parkinson's with balance. I have asthma, which is, I feel more than I ever did, and I can walk maybe 100 yards and I need to rest, so I'm starting to disassemble.
Let me ask you this. With Parkinson's, were you exposed to Agent Orange over in Nam?
Probably. I infected hands twice, which if there was any pesticide around, I guess I would have absorbed that intravenously.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you get infected hands from grabbing elephant grass edges if you're slipping, especially.
Yeah.
Or as you travel through the jungle with elephant grass. So, yeah, it could have. There's no family history of Parkinson's.
Well, let's talk about some of your service medals. You got the Vietnam Service Medal with a Bronze Star. Is that right?
Don't know about the Bronze Star.
It's on your DD-214.
I don't know whether that's, yeah, maybe it's for a campaign. I don't know whether it's a campaign. Probably a it's not a tour star. In other words, I never really knew whether it's for a tour or whether it's for a campaign. The only campaign that I think I was active in was Crazy Horse, so maybe that's where the star comes from. So.
You got a Combat Infantry Badge.
Yeah.
National Defense Service Medal.
Yeah.
An Air Medal. How'd you get an Air Medal?
Well, they decided, since the infantry was spending so much time in helicopters, that if you had so much time, or let's say so many hours, I don't really know how they kept track, whether it was by hours, by flights, by landing zone. I don't know how they kept it, but I qualified for an Air Medal. Anybody would, after they decided, they would give the Army Air Medals. As far as I know, it might have been a strictly Air Force medal before that. But that's why we got Air Medals.
You got a Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal.
Yeah.
With a device.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
You just asked me that, Pat. I think it's for being in a campaign. It's a campaign star, but I don't really know. What's important to me is the Vietnam Service Ribbon and Medal.
You got a Purple Heart?
2.
You got a Purple Heart for the...
for the gunshot wound and a punji stick.
Punji stick. You still have those Purple Hearts?
Yeah. Yep, I think, yeah, I do.
You had some training in military justice?
Is that on there?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be ROTC.
Okay.
And I was on court martials, general court martial in Korea, but that's not. I think that notation is from, the only thing I can think of is ROTC, military justice.
We've been chatting here for a good while. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you think that any relative or friend 50 years from now might be interested in hearing about you, your family, or your military tour?
No, Pat, I think we covered it pretty much. There is one thing where my experience in Vietnam might be a little different. Coming from Korea, I was in Korea for 8 months, and of course I made a visit up to the DMZ to see the conference headquarters there. Got a good look at the North Koreans. We used to listen to Chinese broadcasts on radio. Of course, we weren't that far from China. And you get the idea in Korea that you have bitter enemies. And they're still there, basically. The North Koreans are automatons. I mean, it's... if you go to Panmunjom, you can understand that they are, and always probably will be, bitter enemies of the United States. So I carried that with me to Vietnam, more or less thinking that communism was communism no matter where it is. And I don't think that was the case in Vietnam, and I think I picked that up pretty early, that they weren't bitter enemies. That was as a matter of circumstance for the most, I'm going to say that. And I read a lot about the history of Vietnam and the war since I was in Vietnam. And I still continue to read about, like I mentioned before, tactics and strategy after I came home. And the other thing that bothers me, or I should mention, was since I was there in 1966, at the very beginning of the war, where it became where people started really, we started getting a lot of casualties. That kind of lost my train of thought, but.
You talk about when you first got there were a lot of casualties, and you had been reading about.
Oh yeah, I had the rest of the time, the rest of the war, from '66 to '75, watching television and seeing this, what I had gone through, repeated time after time after time. 10,000 lives, 50,000, 30, 50, 75, and I don't know, that's what kind of stays with me. I think I knew, I had the feeling we didn't need to be there after I'd been there for maybe 2 months. And that's why I say it's a matter of circumstance, more or less. It's how it went on that long.
Well, when you were in country, did you have any interaction with any of the South Vietnamese civilians or soldiers?
No. No, I didn't.
I forgot to introduce my cameraman today, Mark Summers. Mark, thank you for running the camera. Do you have any questions that you want to ask Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. As a matter of fact, along those lines, when you first, I hear an echo when I have this on, when you first volunteered to go over there, that was in '66?
That was, I was wounded in '66. That would have been '65.
65?
No, I'm sorry. I landed in country probably in January of '66. I missed the first battle of Ia Drang by a month. That was in November.
Okay.
And I was in, I remember New Year's Eve at Kashini Barracks, so that was the beginning of '66, January.
And when you volunteered, what was your understanding of the extent of our involvement and what was going on over there at the time?
Well, that's a good question, because kind of hinges with my idea of where we were going in Vietnam. I had the feeling it was going to be a protracted war. In other words, enough so that if I was an infantry officer, I belonged with the infantry, basically. But like I say, once I was in Vietnam for a month or two, I couldn't see the point of it. One soldier mentioned to me, somebody mentioned to me, a veteran, that you don't normally call your bitter enemy Uncle Ho. He would be the Devil Ho or something else or some other. And that kind of has resonated with me. They weren't and aren't enemies. And we were kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And from reading I've done, I like you. I or not like you, but when you got back, watched it on TV. That's what I knew about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read about it since then. And one of the things I read was that the OAS,
Yes.
and the CIA,
Mm-hmm.
actually didn't think they were that much of a threat, and that we shouldn't get involved.
I probably read the book, the Big Lie or something was written by we might have read that, and I always thought he was pretty right on about everything. The other thing is that we're supporting a corrupt government in South Vietnam, with the turnovers, the assassinations or whatnot. And the Viet Cong had control, I think, and that's according to the OSS or whatever, I can't remember the designation, but there are people that knew. I think the Viet Cong were satisfied with the status quo. They could at any time they wanted overrun South Vietnam with the help of North Vietnam. So I guess, you could say, well, if you don't want that to happen. And the other thing is, Vietnam is a village, for the most part, a village country. There are only two cities, maybe three if you want to throw in the Tet. Where was Tet? That was North, Middle, and South. Saigon, Hanoi, and I can't remember the name, in the middle. So the rest is a communist culture. Communist in the sense that it's village. It's communal in that sense, not ideologically. So that's why I say I think the Viet Cong had they could have taken South Vietnam when they wanted, or else they were waiting for the opportunity. And then we came in the middle. We were involved in a civil war there. And I think it's common knowledge now that you don't want to get involved in other people's civil wars. Britain didn't get involved in ours, and there are probably other examples. At any rate, that's all. It's all opinion. And yeah, I'm sorry. Were you in the service, Mark?
I was not. No, because of Vietnam. Really, I turned 18 when the war ended.
Yeah.
I was soured on the military at the time, and I feel like I missed something.
Well, that's another thing I should mention. I was 24 years old as a platoon leader, as an officer. And I have particular empathy for anybody that's 18 years old, which most of the recruits and the enlisted were, that were grabbed out of high school and taken to Vietnam and thrown into that quagmire. Especially, that's basically all I want to say about that.
Well, something Mark asked triggered another question in my mind. When you came back to the States from overseas, did you have your uniform on?
No, that's another thing. I missed getting. This was too early. Before actually, they were spitting on soldiers,
Okay.
So, and even then, even if I had been there in '68 and come back when they were spitting and throwing rotten eggs, I'd have missed it by going right across country to the hospital.
Okay.
Fortunate there in that respect.
All right. Well, thank you for this interview, and thank you for your service, Ed.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Pat. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.